Coming up tonight, we jump into an issue which strikes close to home for everyone: education. We've got an in-depth examination of educational goals and methods.
And tonight, we will be joined by a panel of students, teachers, and experts to discuss this most hotly debated issue. Buckle up, it's going to be quite a ride. It's February 13th, 2012, and this special edition of Student News starts right now. Good evening, I'm Joshua Wolfson.
And I'm Giovanna Robinson-Heitis. Welcome to this special episode of Student News, during which we will bring together experts on education, everyone from students to policy analysts, to discuss some of the biggest challenges facing the education of students everywhere.
In his 2011 State of the Union address last year, President Obama laid out his thoughts on America's education system.
Over the next 10 years, nearly half of all new jobs will require education that goes beyond a high school education. And yet, as many as a quarter of our students aren't even finishing high school. The quality of our math and science education lags behind many other nations. America's fallen to 9th in the proportion of young people with a college degree. And so the question is whether all of us, as citizens and as parents, are willing to do what's necessary to give every child a chance to succeed. When a child walks into a classroom, it should be a place of high expectations and high performance. But too many schools don't meet this test.
This year, in the 2012 State of the Union, the president went so far as to propose keeping students in school until the age of 18. The president's goals for education, at least in that speech, seem to be about making the United States economically successful and winning the future. There is widespread agreement that America's educational system requires reform, but neither the president nor most policymakers seem to have reached a consensus on what the goals of education should be. This is the first question we will be exploring tonight. For its part, the Amherst Public School System has identified its district-wide goals. Quote, "The mission of our schools is to provide all students with a high quality of education that enables them to be contributing members of a multi-ethnic, multicultural, pluralistic society. We seek to create an environment that achieves equity for all students and ensures that each student is a successful learner, is fully respected, and learns to respect others."
President Obama has often linked education with economic prosperity and social mobility. The president speaks of education as a means of getting a job and acquiring skills to function in the workforce. Similar to that, but with slightly different aim, the goals of the Amherst schools seem to revolve around creating contributing members of society. But should education have other goals besides these? In his 2006 TED Talk, author and education expert Sir Ken Robinson had this to say about educational goals.
Our education system is predicated on the idea of academic ability. And there's a reason. The whole system was invented around the world. There were no public systems of education really before the 19th century. They all came into being to meet the needs of industrialism. So the hierarchy is rooted on two ideas. Number one, that the most useful subjects for work are at the top. So you were probably steered benignly away from things at school when you were a kid, things you liked, on the grounds you would never get a job doing that. Is that right? Don't do music, you're not going to be a musician. Don't do art, you won't be an artist. Benign advice. Now, profoundly mistaken. The whole world is engulfed in a revolution. And the second is academic ability, which has really come to dominate our view of intelligence because the universities designed the system in their image. If you think of it, the whole system of public education around the world is a protracted process of university entrance. And the consequence is that many highly talented, brilliant, creative people think they're not, because the thing they were good at school wasn't valued or was actually stigmatized. I believe our only hope for the future is to adopt a new conception of human ecology, one in which we start to reconstitute our conception of the richness of human capacity. Our education system has mined our minds in the way that we've strip-mined the earth for a particular commodity. And for the future, it won't serve us. We have to rethink the fundamental principles on which we're educating our children.
In his 2009 speech at West Point, former professor at Columbia and Yale, essayist and literary critic William Deresiewicz had this to say about the results of America's education system. Quote, "We have a crisis of leadership in America because our overwhelming power and wealth earned under earlier generations of leaders made us complacent, and for too long we've been training leaders who only know how to keep the routine going, who can answer questions but don't know how to ask them, who can fulfill goals but don't know how to set them, who think about how to get things done but not whether they're worth doing in the first place. What we have now are the greatest technocrats the world has ever seen. People who have been trained to be incredibly good at one specific thing, but who have no interest in anything beyond their area of expertise. What we don't have are leaders. What we don't have, in other words, are thinkers. People who can think for themselves, people who can formulate a new direction for the country, for a corporation or a college, for the army, a new way of doing things, a new way of looking at things. People, in other words, with vision."
Here to discuss all of this with us and more are our esteemed panel of students, teachers, and experts. Tonight we are joined by Amherst Regional High School biology teacher Mary McCarthy,
Amherst attorney Peter Vickery,
Amherst Regional High School junior and student news contributor Jamin Olmstead,
Amherst Regional High School sophomore Isabel Jackson,
former Amherst School Committee member and Assistant Director of the Center for Education Policy at the University of Massachusetts, Andrew Churchill.
and last but certainly not least, Amherst Regional High School junior and student news contributor Will Viederman. Andy, we're going to start with you as someone who has worked in education policy for a number of years. What do you think should be our goals for education, and what is your reaction to those who, like Deresiewicz and Robinson, say our current education system has stifled creativity and original thinking?
It's a big agenda, and it's something that working in education policy and working in education, as a number of us have, it's amazing that everybody's an expert on education because everybody's been in schools, and everybody has their own personal experience with that. But for a start, I would say that there are a few things that you're trying to do. One is prepare individuals to be successful in society. Two is transmit the culture to keep it going. And three, prepare people to improve things from the state in which they find them. So you've got sort of survival skills. There's a set of disciplines that you learn. You learn English, you learn math, you learn social studies, you learn science. And Howard Gardner is a theorist about education, talked about those not just as subjects, but as disciplines. They're ways of thinking. So you learn math because you need to be able to quantify things. You learn science, you learn the scientific method. You learn English, you learn to compare and contrast, ways of analyzing. You learn history, the historical method. So it's a big topic. There's a lot of people here to talk about it, so I won't go on. But I think that you probably want to think about sort of individual goals of survival and happiness and societal goals of culture and sort of improvement. So it's big stuff, and there's questions about individual excellence and general equity. So there's a lot to talk about.
We have a pretty good idea of what the goals of people who wanted comprehensive, compulsory public school education to be back in the late 19th, early 20th century. And unfortunately, it wasn't the things that we've been talking about so far. It certainly wasn't the pursuit of happiness or making well-adjusted, wholesome, contributing members of society. Some people felt that, sure, but a lot of the people who created the system that we have today were quite explicit and candid about wanting drones, not wanting people who are philosophical or deep thinkers or professionals, but people who would be farmhands and factory workers who would do the job in a way that's a little more efficient and docile than their parents. What should the goals of education be in the future? That's harder to answer because nothing's as hard to predict as the future. What I feel pretty sure saying is that the problems of the future are going to require a very different way of thinking. If you're going to face struggling with climate change and faith-based violence, which are two of the clear and obvious dangers that you're going to face in the near future, you're going to need critical thinking, questioning of authority, broad-mindedness, and the ability to admit you're wrong and not know the answer, so that when somebody says to you, what are the goals of education, you have to say, I don't know. The ability to say, I don't know, and be adaptable and versatile. And of course, those are the kinds of attitudes that all too often get you sent to the dean's office. We're not going to have the opportunity to rebuild our education system anew from scratch. We have the education system we have, and it has to work better for other people. We're not going to be able to refashion it from whole cloth. That said, do we really still need a system whereby students have to get up at the crack of dawn, get shipped off to school in buses altogether, stay in school for X number of years, and during the school be herded from room to room on a regimented basis every time a buzzer rings? I'm not sure that's the best way to prepare people for a lifetime of independent thinking and inquiring critically about the world around them.
With the creation of the computer, the whole world changed. And with the internet, knowledge is no longer needed because we can get it anytime, anywhere on our iPhone. We can go to Wikipedia and we can look something up. But it's being able to take that knowledge and making informed, good decisions that should be one of the biggest goals of education, I believe.
And I think that's absolutely true, that it's really hard in the school system when it's so performance-based. It's taking the information that you have and doing well on a test, not taking the information you have and really using it and becoming the kind of person that you want to be able to answer questions instead of doing well on the test and cramming and then forgetting it all.
But, I think more and more you see now, like, things people talk about, things people have in common come from pop culture and things like that, as opposed to basic education. And I do think that there should be some basics of primary school and, this elementary education that you're getting, at least, that everyone experiences and everyone has in common, and definitely as a talking point, if nothing else.
Well, I would agree that there's certain core academic content that is important for people to know and understand. But I want to go back to something you said earlier, Will, about the internet and accessing everything. And I think part of what was being asked by your question about whether the schools are doing the job of meeting their goals has to do with skills, and a lot of the literature today is about 21st century skills and how are we preparing students for the 21st century, which sounds very vague, and it is in a way not clear because it's hard to predict what the world's going to be like. What are you going to need? So one thing that we could say, picking up the comment about the internet, would be to be information literate. How do you identify what's a good source, what's not a good source? How do you critically analyze it? It seems as though some of the actual jobs that will exist aren't known yet. So what are the skills that will help you succeed in that marketplace?
I just think generally, from social studies to any class, from the classes that I've had, I think it makes all the difference to have a teacher who really lets you question things, and just not about a theorem or anything, but just in the way that they're presenting class, and a teacher who really makes you feel comfortable to ask different things and to really kind of probe further and to find out what you're really interested in learning. I think that's great, and I think the feeling of being in a classroom when you there's no rules and there's no, okay, you're going to learn this and then this and then this and then that's going to be on the test, to just have something where you can really learn and feel comfortable to ask questions. I think that's really awesome.
You're trying to teach people how to think. And I think the problem comes in when students are discouraged from thinking, right? I mean, but you want to teach people to think in a rigorous way so they can actually discover things and find out how things work and start to say how things should work. And part of that learning process may mean just absorbing the Pythagorean theorem, but part of it may mean debating, how we should think about something.
Now we turn to the other obvious question around educating successfully. How do we, in a practical sense, do it? What policies and strategies will be successful, and how do we make sure they are successful?
In 1967, Brazilian educator Paulo Freire published his influential book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. In it, he argued against a style of education which he dubbed the banking system. He wrote in part, quote, Education thus becomes an act of depositing, in which the students are the depositories and the teacher is the depositor. Instead of communicating, the teacher issues communiques and makes deposits which the students patiently receive, memorize, and repeat. This is the banking concept of education, in which the scope of action allowed to the students extends only as far as receiving, filing, and storing the deposits. They do, it is true, have the opportunity to become collectors or catalogers of the things they store. But in the last analysis, it is the people themselves who are filed away through the lack of creativity, transformation, and knowledge in this at best misguided system. For apart from the inquiry, apart from the praxis, individuals cannot be truly human. Knowledge emerges only through invention and reinvention, through the restless, impatient, continuing, hopeful inquiry of human beings that human beings pursue in the world, and with each other. All right, Peter, let's start with you. So how do we do it? What education policies are actually going to fulfill the goals that we sort of talked about at the beginning, and what can we do to, what practices and policies will sort of make that happen?
I don't know. And that's my honest opinion. I don't know, but I do know that there are people working hard to figure it out. I have some idea. I know that we do need to have an element of testing to ensure that there's equitable distribution of the resources that go into making education. I do believe that we don't have to be test-driven at the same time. So there's two sides of the same coin. We want to ensure that students in a school like Amherst, where only, and I know this is still a lot, but a quarter of the students are from low-income households, get the same quality, the same opportunities in education that students in Holyoke get, where 2/3 to 3/4 of the students are from low-income households, same in Springfield. And we need to ensure that because of this historical intersection between race and class in the United States, that the provision of education as, it's not a commodity, it's not a product, it's a process, but the resources that go into education are provided equitably and they don't get overly concentrated on affluent white communities. So given that, I think there are ways to ensure that we can provide education fairly and equitably, and we also have to admit that we're not doing it well right now. I think the wrong approach is to say, I know, let's have bilingual education abolished, and we'll do that by fiat via the ballot initiative. Or to say, I know what we need another class on climate change education or entrepreneurialism. Let's tack that onto the curriculum, and that way everybody will be prepared and we can test on that easily. So I'm clearer about the wrong way to go about this than the right way.
I went to a very weird school from 1st to 3rd grade. We had a loft with a library. We had donkeys, chickens, sheep, lots of fields. We had a garden, one room, 27 kids. And I don't remember actively trying to learn almost any facts. And yet, when I came to public school in 4th grade, I was the only kid in my grade to make it to the finals of the Geography Bee for our school. And so I performed quite successfully. But I do believe it is very possible for us to teach in a way that will have kids be really excited to learn and to think learning is cool. I think that's a really important aspect for what education should do. I do think it is possible to find ways to teach students information or to give students knowledge without teaching them facts.
I would just argue that most of my my best classes are not because I'm most interested in math or most interested in English, but because of the teachers that I have. And I think I've had classes where I'm not interested in the subject, but I love going to class, I love learning about it, and I think that teachers have been a big part of that. So depending on the class size or the subject, I think most of it boils down to the teacher and how they act.
So, Mary, considering what Will and Isabel are saying, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and then also because standardized testing has become such a huge part, AP tests, and then also, MCAS tests have become such a part of the curriculum. Does that inhibit you as a teacher at all or cause you problems in trying to build those relationships and make the subject as interesting as, Will and Isabel seem to be saying teachers can make the learning process?
That's a really interesting question. I myself got engaged in some classes I took because I had an engaging teacher who made it interesting, and something that I had to take a medieval history course that I totally didn't want to take, and by the end I loved it because my teacher made it come live, and that was wonderful. So that resonates with me. In terms of the standardized testing question, I think there are a lot of ways to look at it. I agree with Peter that there's an equity issue involved in terms of testing and in terms of having common standards. What should all students be able to know, do, and understand in order to, if you think ahead past school, have access to the options that are available to them after school? One mode is mainly what we test. And so if you're a great linguistic learner, you're going to do really well on those tests. And maybe if your way of learning isn't that and is more kinesthetic or another mode, maybe you will not be able to demonstrate what you know, even though you may know a lot. And they don't usually test for creativity or problem solving, which are some of the things that we anticipate people needing in the future. And as a teacher, I've felt that dilemma. When I first started teaching AP Bio, which was many, many years ago, many years in the past, it was painful for me because I loved biology so much. And students would ask these great questions, and you would love to diverge and go and talk about them and have the opportunity to do that, but you're fighting the clock. You have to finish X by this amount of time, and I do find sometimes I have to crank it and say, well, if we can come back to that later, we will. And I think that's not, when we all talked about goals, that's not the best that we'd like education to be.
Really, we're still dealing with the remnants of a system that was set up to deal with the industrial model, where you trained maybe a quarter of the people to be the managers and run the factories, and then you didn't need to do that well with the rest of them because there were jobs out there. They could work in the factories or they could make a living or whatever. At some point, the factory jobs went away, and there became this notion that to succeed in life, everybody needed skills that are roughly equivalent to what it takes to get into college. You need to be able to, do higher order thinking skills. And so now I think what we're dealing with is that nobody quite knows how to do that, to get all kids up to some relatively high level of education, which we've never had to do before. And so I think that's why when you ask how we should do it, nobody knows. I think people have this sense of equity, and people also have this sense of opportunity for their own kids, and those things don't always fit together. If you look at Europe, they have apprenticeship programs and they have testing that divides people fairly early on. In a number of countries, you take your exam to decide whether you're a university-bound student or a technical-bound student. And there are very good technical training programs and technical careers, but you're deciding pretty early whether you're one of the university-bound or whether you're going into a trade. And here, we don't like to decide that for people, so we like to keep options open, but then it's not quite so clear what the right preparation is and how you motivate kids who may or may not be motivated by the sort of carrots and of the university testing process and application process that seems to drive a lot of our high school. And in a way, that's a luxury because a lot of kids, they're not even in the running.
Yeah, and I think teaching to the test in urban areas too also really fosters more of a hatred of education really for kids there, because and I think going back to the idea of really enjoying what you're learning, right, and enjoying education itself, I think that's a big key. I've met kids who are from lower income families or from more from inner city backgrounds, not just from Amherst, and generally there's less of a love of learning, right? And so I think when you have methods, they're overcompensating really to get these kids involved, and in trying to get them to score better on tests, they're really making them dislike what they're learning even more, and these kids are less inclined to be educated to a higher standard later.
The kind of skills that we were talking about, as Mary was saying, the kind of skills that we think will probably be necessary for surviving into the 21st century are not the kind of skills that we're testing for. We're trying to inculcate this imaginative, creative approach to learning. At the same time, we ask questions like, what is Hamlet about? Here are 4 options. One of them's right. If you get it wrong, you obviously don't know what Hamlet was about. And at the same time, we have to test in a way that ensures equitable distribution of resources and equality of opportunity, which we don't have in Massachusetts right now. And that's why so many parents are for MCAS in low-income communities and communities of color.
If I could go back to the idea of this expansion of education, I do think that's a bit of a problem. I mean, the idea that you know, and not taking a gap year, you know, kids are going to go through all the way through elementary school, middle school, and high school, and then go to college, and then go to, you know, possibly go to graduate school. There's all these options. When people are just going to school straight through into their mid or late 20s like that, I mean, it gets back to the idea of what's education really for. But that doesn't give nearly as much time to really put to use the skills you learn through education. I think it's important to go back and look at, you know, some of the great innovators of our time, you know, guys like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, you know, these guys who really, you know, either dropped out of college or didn't go to college and still were obviously very successful. So I think the emphasis on, you know, higher education like that is, you know, exaggerated.
I would say that it's a lot about, why are you going to school? Are you going to school to get the A? Are you going to school to get into a college? Are you going to school to take this class because that'll look good on your resume or whatever? And I don't think that's successful if that's what education is about, is to get to the next level of something. And I think college I think it should be an option, but I don't think the ultimate goal of high school should be to get into college, because I think then you lose a lot of really important things that you should be getting along the way if that's the final goal. So I think that's important to keep in mind.
I think the first thing anyone ever said to me when I walked in the doors of the high school, we had meetings with our guidance counselor. The first thing she said to us was, get to know me, because I'm going to be writing a college recommendation for you. And I don't think that's it. I personally think my guidance counselor is an awesome person. And there's a real emphasis throughout all of high school on college. You get a B+ in a class freshman year. And instead of being like, okay, I need to work on these things, you're like, oh no, my GPA was hurt. Because it's shown, or at least people think that, oh, colleges are going to be looking at this. Colleges will be looking at how I do. There's such a focus throughout really the entire country on, oh, getting into college, Ivy Leagues, it's detrimental to the education.
I think education is trying in the purest sense to help you make the most of your life, you know, and how that translates. I don't think we, you know, there's a lot of different ways that you can describe that. I mean, there is a sense that, you know, you need to be able to give people what they want. And so one of the things that good students get used to is giving teachers what they want. And that can be helpful, but it can also be kind of crippling in a way. So, but there's also preparing you to make the most of your life also requires you to solve problems and to get out of dilemmas that you get into and deal with unfamiliar circumstances and be creative and, you know, get along with other people. And so there's all these things that education should be helping you with. And a lot of times they conflict if you want to do them at scale for millions of kids in classrooms. So, you know, I think we're still trying to figure out, how do you build creativity and conformity and you know, excitement and, you know, dealing with drudgery, because that's part of life too. So, you know, it's a messy thing, and you know, I wonder if we'll ever figure it out.
And my one concluding remark would be, beware of policy advocates bearing gifts who, unlike Andy, don't acknowledge that this is really difficult. There's no quick fix. There's no 3-point plan. There is no ballot question that's going to fix this. And final comment, the dropouts we really need to talk to aren't the ones who made $1 billion. The They're the ones who didn't make $1 billion. They're the people who've been damaged by the system. And they probably have a better perspective on what works and what doesn't work. And they don't really get much attention.
Well, we're just going to have to leave it at there. If you'd like to learn more about the show, how to get involved, or donate money, please visit our website at www.riverwolfproductions.com/student-news. Until next time, I'm Giovanna Robinson-Heides.
And I'm Joshua Wolfson. Thanks to all of our panelists for joining us, and thanks to you for watching. Stay strong and stay proud. Good night.